Welcome to the Sandy and Toddcast, a podcast about all things strange, unusual, and a little bit odd. Why? Because that's how we roll. What are we talking about this time? Check it out. Well, hello, Toddcast.
Hello, Sandy.
Hello, hello, hello. Now, this week, you are, what do they call it, steering the ship?
Well, I mean, not really. I've got some of the stuff on my end that I have to take care of because you're technically handicapped. But other than that, that was a little dig.
You're not funny. You're not funny. I wish everybody could see me rolling my eyes. Wait until we go video.
No, that'll be. Let's not do that.
Yeah, I know, right?
But at any rate, yeah, we're actually going to be able to share some audio of some investigations that you and I have been on separately.
Yes.
Some evidence, and we'll get to that a little bit later on. Kind of excited to share what we have.
Yeah. Well, last week we did Twisted Towns, which was so much fun, and we didn't know what we were doing because it was our first Twisted Towns installment, but came out beautiful, and we had such a good time with it. My mom will be joining us at some point to talk.
I'm so excited about that.
She's going to be talking about her experience. I say it with laughter, but growing up in the mob in Utica, New York. So that should be very entertaining. My mom is, she's an interesting character to say the least.
Like the Godfather, she's the godmother of the podcast.
She really is.
If we need somebody worked on or something, like a dump turned over or something like that, we're going to call her, and she's got the connections for us.
Exactly. Ma Zogby. So you wanted to talk this week about evidence and different types of evidence and what you should believe, how skeptical should you be in a situation like this? And I'm a pretty skeptical person, considering the fact that I'm kind of immersed in the world of the paranormal. I'm a pretty skeptical person. I have to rule out pretty much any external factors before I can say, geez, this seems like it's probably paranormal.
And even if it's something that I experience personally and maybe even have evidence on audio or video or a picture or whatever, I still question it.
Yes.
Because we're brought up to question all that kind of stuff. We're told there's no boogeyman under the bed. Mm-hmm. We're told there's no ghosts. We're told there's nothing evil. There's nothing bad. It's not true. And then we go through life. And I think a lot of times that's why we close off to that stuff. And that's why people, some people don't experience anything. And then there are people who experience everything.
I watch a lot we always come back to the Dead Files, but I love that show. And I think it's a great concept, great format. And there are a lot of times when, if you notice, the wives in the household will say, oh, I've had this happen, this happened, this happened. The kids have said, oh, this has happened. But yet the hubby says, I've never had anything happen.
I ain't never had nothing happen. I've lived here 25 years.
That's right.
And
I always think, is it a case of you don't want to acknowledge that it's happening? Maybe it is happening. Maybe you've talked yourself out of it happening. Or did something really not happen to you? I do believe that spirits are more drawn to some people than they are to other people.
I think, too, like when you have a group of people investigating, a lot of it depends on their energy.
Yes.
I investigated for a long, long time and never really had a lot of stuff happen until one event. And then once that event happened with an individual who's very, very open, then things happened for me. And it always, again, it depended on who I was investigating with. I think those energies have to be right. I think there has to be a right level of skepticism and belief.
Right.
And, there's even times like I've gotten evidence and I didn't hear it. And somebody else would say, okay, listen here. Do you hear this? And all of a sudden I do hear it. Mm-hmm. And then to have somebody that you investigate with go, I don't think that's anything. Boy, I want to strangle him.
Yes.
Because I'm like my worst critic. If I didn't hear something there, if I really didn't hear it, I will tell you. But if I tell you that there's something there, there's something probably there.
It's really funny because a lot of times when I'm investigating, I will hear things that other people don't hear. And I'll go back. Every time I investigate, I have my own little digital recorder. And I'll be in the middle of a basement and I'll say, did you hear those footsteps? nobody heard the footsteps, but I know I heard the footsteps. You kind of second guess yourself a little bit, but then you go back to the audio and lo and behold, there's footsteps.
Right.
And it's so interesting. And sometimes I don't know if it's because I am so open. Maybe I do hear things that other people aren't allowed to hear. Am I picking up on things, or is it just that they're closed off?
We know that about you. We know that you're very open to everything, and possibly maybe they're not so closed off, but maybe they're in a situation where they're open but not quite as open as you.
I do think that spirits have the ability to show themselves. They can be heard by people who are more open. Mm-hmm. And I think they're drawn to people. One of the examples of an EVP that we're going to play in a little while, classic example of an investigation I was in, and this spirit or spirits, I will say spirits, knew I was coming. They knew. They know when people are open.
Listen, it's kind of hard not to know because she's really loud. So I'm coming. Here I come.
I am not loud. You know I'm not. So anyway, I think they're more open. I think that they're more willing to show themselves to people who are more willing or open to accepting them, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I also think that it's probably easier for them. I mean, communication, you have to think about this. If there are energies, if there are spirits, if there are ghosts, we don't know how powerful they are. Mm-hmm. We don't know what knowledge they have. And so if they find someone who's open, it's easier to communicate through that way than trying to communicate with somebody who's not hearing or seeing you or whatever.
Right.
So maybe it's not necessarily that they are drawn to you, but they realize that they can actually communicate with you. And that's why those people tend to get more things happen to them.
That's very true. And, it's funny because we talk about their strength, and the theory is that spirit energy can manifest more easily when they draw energy from others. That's why you see in investigations, batteries die. I've been on investigations where batteries have died that were supposed to last 4 or 5 hours have died in 10 minutes. You can watch the battery level go down right in front of you. I've been in situations where we've had a chair slammed to the ground. Nobody was even near it. Now, that is a powerful force. That is energy that has literally slammed a chair to the ground.
Yeah, well, think about it. Even as if you're a healthy human being, and chairs aren't necessarily that heavy, mm-hmm. but even to physically, as a human, pick that up and throw it down with a force, that takes a little something. And if you're not somebody who's in shape, you might feel it a little bit later on in your muscles. So imagine what it would take for an energy that does not have a human body to do something like that. That's what's incredible to me.
When I'm done with an investigation, I'm usually pretty drained, so I don't really think too much about it that evening. I take everything in stride. I keep it in my brain, and then usually the next day I process it. I start to process it and what happened. I was on an investigation just a few months ago, and I was talking to the owner of the establishment afterwards, and it was a little bit awkward because I didn't have anything that I could solidly tell him until I was home, rested, and I was able to process everything that happened. And it was an incredible night, and I have to speak to him. Once I belonged to an internet show called Ghosts, Pubs, and Grub, and we essentially investigate restaurants and locations that, catering facilities, things like that. And this was a restaurant, and there was so much going on in this establishment that by the time I was done that night, I was so drained I couldn't even think straight. When I got home and I thought about the things that had happened, I was just blown away by it. And of course, that's when it starts to kick in that I start to think to myself, okay, could it have been this? Could it have been that? I think just about everything that could possibly happen on an investigation happened to us that night. It was crazy. And hopefully once this episode is out, I can talk a little bit more about it. We'll talk about it down the road because it was fantastic.
So I wanted to, before we actually get into, and I know people are waiting to hear some of the evidence, and we will get there. But before we get there, I wanted to share like a personal experience where it was kind of a holy shit moment for me, because I'd done some investigating and had done some investigating with a group and have had some things happen and, you know, whatever. But by myself, not so much. I lived in an older home, an old Tudor home that was built in about 1920, 21, something like that.
Okay.
And there were 2 floors to it, and it was a really nice house. And for a while, I had a tenant, a very good friend of mine, Lisa, who lived upstairs. But she had moved out, and so the house was empty the day that I invited my friend Sherry over. Now, Sherry is what I call her a woo-woo. And what that means is like she gets feelings on everything. It affects her on a daily basis. She came over and I'd gotten a brand new piece of equipment that everybody probably is aware of called the K2 meter.
Yes.
K2 meters measure EMF, electromagnetic fields, and that could be basically unseen electricity that is in the old wiring in your home, a fuse box, a breaker box. So that's part of what it reads, but it also reads fluctuations in EMF that don't make any sense.
Right.
So to test the unit out, I did check out my home. It's an older home. I did find some EMF in the room that we were working in, but it was near the floor on the other side of the room. So where we were investigating, there was no stray EMF.
Okay.
And the other thing too is that typically if EMF is, I want to call it man-made, but if it's from an electrical source or something like that, it's a constant buzz of the lights.
Right.
They light up and they stay lit up. There's really no fluctuation of them.
Right.
If there's nothing going on and all of a sudden you kind of get a little blip kind of thing, that's something else. That's what we're talking about when we talk about using the K2 meter. Always make sure that you don't have your smartphone in your pocket because that can affect it. And I love catching people with their, like, oh my God, look at that. And it's like, give your phone in your pocket. Yeah, take it out.
Take it out.
It's the first thing I say to them. But we'd gotten this and I invited her over and I'm like, well, let's test this thing out. I've never used one before. I've seen them used, whatever. And so we started doing a little investigation. Now, at this point, I had lived in my house, I don't know, at least 5 or 6 years. Never had anything go on. Never had any experiences at all.
Okay.
Now, my tenant, Lisa, used to tell me all the time, oh, there's always stuff going on. I hear people downstairs all the time. I've had people come up and talk into my ear when I'm falling asleep. All that kind of stuff, okay?
Right.
So Sherry and I start doing, is anybody here? You know, if you want to come talk, we're here, blah, blah, blah. And, we're doing it for like 15, 20 minutes. We're not getting anything. And I was ready to kind of close up shop and just move on. And I said, and she goes, well, I want to keep going. And I said, well, I'm going to go do some dishes because I had a sink full of dishes in the next room. So I started doing some dishes. Sherry continued the investigation without me. And she's kind of going through a series of questions. I'm listening and I'm thinking, this is kind of weird because her series of questions, you know, when you're trying to start to get activity, your questions might be kind of all over to try and find something that makes them respond back to you. She was following a natural pattern of questions. And eventually she said, Todd, you may want to come in here. So I did. And she was on one side of the room. I was kind of in the middle. And then the K2 meter was on the other end of the room, sitting on a couch. And she was asking questions and she was getting responses.
Wow.
Now, again, I wasn't in the room to start the conversation. I was in the room. Nothing happened. I walked out. All of a sudden, this energy must have been drawn to her.
Right.
So according to the conversation, we'll call it that, between her and the K2, she had talked to 2 individuals that day, 2 energies. A younger female energy, probably a child, and an older gentleman. Now, the interesting about the gentleman was she nailed the profession and she nailed the name.
Wow.
And she did the thing. Does your name start with A? Does it start with B? Does it start with C? And as soon as she hit G, boom. Okay, well, you think of a guy's name that starts with G. Hey, is your name George? bam.
Wow. Interesting.
Now she didn't know this, but I had done research on the home when I bought it because I'm into that kind of stuff.
I was going to ask you that.
Doctor by the name of George owned the house.
Wow. Interesting.
He knew that he was a doctor.
Wow.
So at any rate, eventually things calmed down and the conversation stopped and we shut the thing off and we started talking about work because she was someone that I worked with at the job that I had. And all of a sudden, very distinctly, there were hardwood floors throughout this entire house, downstairs and upstairs. From above us, there was one long hallway that went from one end of the house to the other with doors on either side. We distinctly heard footsteps walk down the hall to the front of the house and shut a door.
Wow.
Now, here's what I did. I cried. I literally teared up because nothing like that had ever happened in that house to me.
Yeah.
Nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a clay tile roof. So it wasn't a bird on the roof. It wasn't rats in the attic or anything. It was not that. These were shoes it was hard soled shoes on the wooden floor. Tick, 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 tick. Bam. And two things. Number one, I realized that something was in my home.
Right.
And number two, that opened the door for other activity. So once that happened, even if I wasn't with someone else, then the activity was happening.
That's amazing.
I love telling the story because it gets strange in that I would get up very early in the morning. You and I both worked in radio. I was doing mornings. Mm-hmm. The station I worked for was about 40 minutes away. So I'd have to get up really early in the morning to get ready, hit the road, all that kind of stuff. And the house was made of stone. So literally there was a car crash out front one day and I never heard it happen because the house was so thick with stone.
Yeah.
There was no penetrable noise or anything like that. So at any rate, I am in my bathroom getting ready. And from what was the living room area of the house, living room, dining room area, I heard a little girl giggle. Well, I finished brushing my teeth, put on my jacket, and got the okay. And the other thing that happened one time is I was in the bedroom, which was at the front of the house, and I distinctly heard from the other side of the house someone say something.
Oh, wow.
Quite loud. Again, nobody home. My dog heard it as well and kind of went crazy over it.
Wow.
So these were things that then started happening because of this incident with this one person who I think probably opened the door. Mm-hmm. Now, one other note, and then I'll let you talk a little bit.
Sure.
Interestingly enough, at the time, my sister had come to visit and had brought her granddaughter with her. And the granddaughter, they were staying in the apartment area upstairs. And the granddaughter basically knew somebody was up there. She talked about it. She was seeing it. And, you know, I kept telling him, oh, there's nothing around. There's nothing going on. Because at that time I didn't know. But the little girl did see it. So I think it's interesting. You can be in a place for 6-7 years, nothing happened. Something changes the energy in your home.
Right.
Could be anything. You could be doing some remodeling.
Yep.
It could be a new person that moves in. It could be a change in your energy because of a new job or a stressful situation. We don't know. And all of a sudden, bam, all this stuff starts happening.
Sure. I think that's a great point. And also, children can see a lot more than adults can because by the time that you start to get old enough, 5-6 years old, all the adults have told you that there's no such thing as this, there's no such
Correct.
that. And my niece for years did not know my grandfather. My niece for years would tell her mother that she would see my grandfather and she would describe him. She would see him. And I just feel like we shouldn't be teaching young children not to be open-minded, not to be aware of themselves, of their surroundings. I think it does a disservice to children to not allow them to be who they are and explore the things that they experience in life. I was at a Reiki session a few months ago, and there was a psychic there, and she, psychic medium. She told me, she looked at me. She said, you are a very strong healer empath. She said, you are also a medium, a psychic. She said, did you see things as a child? And I said, I'm sure I did as a child, but as I got older, I don't remember that. Now, I don't know if I blocked myself, because a lot of my growing up years was me blocking the abilities that I had because I didn't understand them. I didn't even know I had them at the time. But, I just don't think that, I think we should allow children to be who they are. And I think
be children, right?
Be children. And if you see your great grandfather, it's okay to see your great grandfather. It's not a bad thing,
How wonderful. I mean, as an adult, how wonderful is it to know that somebody passed on is with you?
That's right.
I mean, it's very comforting. We've both lost people in our lives. And
yes.
if you knew that they were with you and spending time with you and maybe or maybe not watching out over you or whatever, I mean, how comforting is that as an adult? Why do we take that away from children?
Without a doubt. I'm almost 50, and about a year and a half ago...
almost 50.
I'm an old one. But about a year and a half ago, a psychic that I know, a wonderful woman, told me that my grandparents, she didn't know they were my grandparents at the time, but she described them to a T and said they come and go in my life. And she described them to a T. So that was very comforting to me, even at my age. When I was at the Reiki session, I lost my dog Jack back in May of last year, and I am still reeling from that loss. And she and another medium who were there both described him at the same exact time. Now, they didn't know me from Adam. They both described him, said he was running around the table. He's here to protect me. Now, how are these people going to know this? A little black dog running around the table. How would they have known that? It's pretty amazing that just knowing that Jack is there means the world to me. It's comforting. So why would you take that comfort away from somebody? It doesn't make sense.
Well, it's because, again, in our lives, everybody wants everything to be black and white. Mm-hmm. Everything needs to be right or wrong. Everything needs to, and so if it's a little gray or we can't quite have the answer to it right now,
right,
we don't want to deal with it.
No, you're right. You're 100% correct. We don't want to deal with the things that we don't fully understand. We don't want to embrace them. Okay, so I want to go back to the story that you just told about your old house, because I always wonder about this. You are a paranormal investigator. You've gone on many investigations. You've dealt with a lot of crazy shit, like a lot of us have dealt with during an investigation. What is it about your own house that makes you, not just you specifically, but anyone in general, makes them more nervous when they have activity in it? Do you see what I mean? My house has zero activity.
Well, and I think here's the problem. My house had zero activity. So it wasn't that my house had activity. My house had zero activity until this one event kind of opened things up. And then it had activity that didn't make a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm. And it freaked you out, right?
It did, because when you hear a little girl giggling, you know, and then you have somebody, and I guess I didn't add this to the story, but later, my friend who's the woo-woo friend, Sherry, who was there with me that day, said she thought that was a trickster spirit.
Okay.
That it really wasn't a little girl.
All right.
So then what is it? So it wasn't that there was activity in my house. It was just unexpected activity. You know, there's never been any other reports by me. My roommate said, yeah, there's some stuff that goes on. Of course, I didn't believe her because I didn't experience anything. But it's that first experience. You're like, okay, I've lived here for 6 years. There's nothing. And now there's something. What's going on?
Right. And it's fun. I think about this from time to time because I literally, pun intended, my house is dead. Like, there is nothing in my house. I don't feel anything in my house. I don't have any experiences in my house. But sometimes I'll wonder to myself, because when I go into an investigation, I am balls to the wall. I am not afraid of anything.
I'm not surprised that you have a pair.
I hate you. But it's not necessarily always a good thing, I think. You know, you have to, reel yourself in sometimes a little bit and not be too aggressive in your investigating. But
do you think possibly there might be something going on in your house, and it's just your safe place. So you're able to be closed off there. And whether you intentionally do it or, subconsciously do it, maybe you're closing off because, you look at somebody like Amy Allen, who's on Dead Files. We talked about them. She's open all the time. So she has to block it out when she's home, or she's got dead people crawling in her room, looking for help and stuff like that. I just wonder I think every place has something going on. So I'm surprised that your place doesn't have something going on.
That is a really, really good point. Something I've never thought about before, because I would say I can go anywhere and pick something up to some extent.
Even if it's intuition or just the feels or something like that. But if you're not getting anything in your house, I would say that you're just automatically shutting down as a safe haven.
It's possible. It's highly possible. You could be 100% correct. I think about that sometimes. If I experienced activity in my own home, would I be nervous? Would I be the same person I am when I go into an investigation?
Here's something that's interesting, though. I know that you're lying because I do know that something recently did happen in your house, if you remember properly.
That's true.
And it was and whatever happened may have had something to do with where you were at mentally and emotionally and spiritually at that particular time. But something did happen. Remember?
That's true. Yes. Yeah. And I'll just tell it really, really quickly. But I was in the recliner with my dog.
She was smoking in the library with a pipe and a small cat
with my
on
evening
her lap.
gown on. And
the cockatoo was singing sweetly as the breeze wafted through the library into the drawing room.
Oh, my God. I think we should do...
Oh, Belvedere, she claimed. Bring me my champagne. Belvedere entered the room. Ironically, Belvedere was a woman. Okay.
All right. Are you done?
Here, lady, here's your champagne, said Belvedere.
So anyway, we should probably do, it's funny how I come up with episode ideas in the middle of something else, but we should probably do an episode on reincarnation.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Definitely do an episode on reincarnation, because I was not a believer in reincarnation until maybe a year and a half ago. And this story kind of ties in with it. I was with my dog Spike in the recliner. We were watching a virtual lecture. I have a smart TV, so I get to put it up on the big, huge screen. I was watching a virtual online lecture about the Holocaust, and I've always been fascinated with the Holocaust. And I have been told that I was a woman with 2 children who died during the Holocaust. And there are a lot of parallels in my life to it, which really makes sense to me. And so we really should do an episode on reincarnation. Anyways, I was sitting there, and it was a very emotional virtual lecture for me. I've been listening to a lot of family members of Holocaust survivors and Holocaust survivors themselves lately, the past few months. It was a very emotional period in this lecture. And all of a sudden, the baby gate that was up against my stairway to go to the second floor of the house just fell over for absolutely no reason. There was no cat. I have 2 cats. There was no cat near it. There was nothing was moving. Nobody was walking in the house that would have made it, fall over. I have absolutely no idea. Now, could it have an explanation? Sure, it could. But I can't find one other than emotionally, I was in a really just an emotional point during that lecture where I think that it possibly could have been something that I did, or I stirred something within the house that culminated in that gate falling down. I really think so. The farther out from the event that I get, the more I've thought about it and played with it in my mind, the more I think it's highly possible.
She's a poltergeist.
I'm my own poltergeist. Yes, I'm my own poltergeist.
They're here.
I know. That movie creeped me out.
And the only thing that creeped me out about that movie was the old guy singing the church hymns coming up to the door. He was creepy. God, he was very creepy. And if you think about it, there are a lot of, especially in the Dead File, she's described people looking like that several times over the years. That's like a recurring type of theme. The tall, extremely thin man with it looks almost like the preacher's outfit on. Yep. And it's sort of a recurring theme. It's very creepy. So then the question is, was the character really there, or were they just seeing him like that? Right.
Right.
Oh, there's so many things. We'll have to have an episode on spooky movies.
Yes.
Talk about our favorites.
Some of my favorites, the one that creeped me out the most of all time, ever, The Ring.
Really?
Yes. I wouldn't even get out of bed.
Okay.
I was watching it in bed by myself one night. I wouldn't even get out of bed to go to the bathroom. I was afraid. And that never happens to me because I love scary movies. Not blood and gut movies. So,
Yeah, like Saw. Saw doesn't do it for me.
No,
like, that's nothing.
It's nothing to me. But the real psychological, spooky movies, they freak me out. You were freaking me out the other night. He kept sending me videos of The Exorcist that were just disgusting and awful at like 11 o'clock at night.
Do you know what she did?
I just hate you.
Your
I really
bleeping
hate you.
daughter.
You do that so well. It's kind of weird. I don't know. You're very weird. But yeah. So that happened. So it's highly possible that I could be blocking it. And when I was in an emotional point of sort of letting my guard down, that I brought something out. It's possible. Well, thank you. I go into investigations and I'm not afraid of anything, but I think to myself, well, what if, and that event when that gate fell down, that did, not only did Spike the dog jump about 3 feet, but I kind of got nervous
didn't you
myself.
tell me that you actually shit your pants a little bit?
I did not. I jumped a little bit, but I did not do that. That's, oh my God.
Oh, yeah.
It's like doing a podcast with my annoying brother.
If you're enjoying this episode of the Sandy and Toddcast, there's more where that came from. Follow Sandy and Todd on Facebook. Just look for the Sandy and Toddcast, or you can subscribe to their YouTube channel and check out the video version each week there. Find these guys on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and wherever you listen to your podcasts. Soon you'll be able to support the Sandy and Toddcast on Patreon and be able to follow them on Instagram. As always, thanks for joining in the fun, and stay weird.
I have a really cool K2 story that I want to share. About 8 years ago, I love to travel, and I love to travel to haunted places, and I love to stay in haunted places, and Dave sometimes shakes his head, but we do it.
That poor man. I don't know how he puts up with you.
I know. We will sometimes go on vacation based on the destination. Is it really haunted or is it not? So in 2000,
he get to check? Does he get to choose places too?
Not at all.
Is it just you?
Not at all. I'll pick something.
I'm going to send that guy some cash just to.
I'll pick something, but I don't pick bad places. I pick amazing places. It's just, we've been to New Orleans. 2013, we went to St. Augustine, Florida. Now, St. Augustine, Florida goes back to the 1600s. Very old, very haunted town. And St. Augustine, Florida, of course, has the St. Augustine Lighthouse, which is renowned for hauntings.
Love it.
Yes.
Love it.
And I the first time I ever heard of it was on Ghost Hunters.
Wasn't that amazing, by the way?
That was amazing.
Wasn't that like freaking amazing?
That was amazing. And that's why I want to tell this story, because it's a great example of being able to use your brain, common sense, and a K2 meter. We went and I said to Dave, let's take the Dark of the Moon night tour. And it starts at like 10:30 at night. And they let you use a K2 meter, which I brought my own anyways. But they let you use your K2 meter. And of course, the 15 people on this tour are, I'm the only person that's truly interested in taking it seriously. Everybody else thinks it's a parlor trick and, they want to have some fun with it.
You're like the geek in science class who has the pocket protector and the thick glasses.
I so am. So we go to this tour and there's kids on it. I'm like, these people aren't taking this seriously. I want to see if I can get any activity. And I have always had activity. I am, unlike you, I can go anywhere and get activity. I have so many, one of my EVPs that I want to show you guys later is from Gettysburg. I have had so many experiences in Gettysburg. It's ridiculous. So they just come to me, they're drawn to me. I have a lot of experiences. So we get to the tour and there's kids on there and they give us a beautiful tour of the lighthouse, of the keeper's cottage, the whole 9 yards. It's beautiful. Then they say, we're going to give you about 45 minutes to do some investigating and wander around. So everybody, because of the Ghost Hunters episode, everybody immediately runs to the lighthouse. And I said, have at it. Have a good time with it. I'm going to the keeper's cottage. Right. So literally, Dave and I were the only two people in this keeper's cottage. The history of the whole lighthouse is that when they were moving, the lighthouse has been moved at least once. So as erosion took place, they had to keep moving it back. And at one point, I think in the 1800s, they were moving it back, and ships would come into the town, but they couldn't bring everything to the lighthouse. So they built sort of like a little railway system that would go from the lighthouse down to the water so that they could move things more easily, supplies and things to move the lighthouse. And the lightkeeper at the time had children, and the children one day got in one of the carts, and this is documented, this is a true story. The children one day got in one of the carts, they were playing around. The cart moved, went down to the end of the rail system, fell into the water on top of them, and Dang. They all drowned. There were, I think there were 3 of them, and they were all young, and they all drowned. One of the children that drowned, according to the tour guide, was a young African-American child, probably one of the workers' children, and then the lightkeeper's children. And the legend, now we get into a little bit of a legend. The legend is that the kids still haunt the keeper's cottage. So I went in knowing this because of the tour. The keeper's cottage was under some repairs, so all of the electricity was off in it. It was pitch black. And we usually travel south in the winter time because it just gets so hot down there during the summer, which ironically I'm moving to Savannah eventually. But right. So it was right around Christmas time. It was December. And we went in, we were completely alone. We had the K2 meter. And I just sort of half seriously said, are the little kids here in the room with me? You know, not in that same sentence, but, and my K2 meter lights up. Now, again, there was no electrical energy in that house because they were restoring it. And I said, oh, Dave, we got a hit. And essentially my line of questioning, are you... And I can't remember the names. I'm just going to throw names out that are on the top of my head. I can't remember the actual names. Are you Angelina? And it was quiet. Are you Jennifer? And it was quiet. And they never said the name of the young African-American girl. And I said, are you the young African-American girl who died? And it went crazy. The K2 went crazy. I stood there and had a conversation with what could have been this child.
Right.
And then all of a sudden it got quiet. So I took the K2 and I moved about 10 feet to my left, and there she was. It started to go crazy again. And I started asking questions. She moved. And I started asking questions. And then all of a sudden it just stopped. It just stopped. But it was a great introduction for me into K2 because I had a K2, but I never really had a lot of luck with it. But that was such an amazing experience. And meanwhile, everybody else is running around the grounds and they're in the lighthouse and everything. And here I'm having such an amazing conversation, an intelligent conversation with someone in the keeper's cottage. And it was just a great story, and it's an experience that that sticks with me because it was pretty poignant to know that there was a possibility that I was speaking to a child who lost her life tragically.
Something about lighthouses, I'm really drawn to them. I always have been. They're a favorite of mine. Whether I am investigating or just doing research on them or looking at pretty pictures, I'm really drawn to them. So I don't know if I have some past life history there or what, but you walk into one of them and I don't know. I mean, I'm going to say this off the top of my head, but I don't know that I have ever had stronger feelings, intuition when you walk into one of those places because of the hard work that went into it. I mean, you had to be really dedicated to your job so that people didn't die. It was hard. You were isolated. There's water. I mean, there's so many things about lighthouses that just lend themselves to hauntings and stuff like that.
It's funny you say that, because now that you're saying this, I'm thinking about all the places that I've visited. I've visited some beautiful places. They all have lighthouses. I love lighthouses. When we travel someplace, Maine or Massachusetts or Florida or Georgia, wherever we happen to go, I always kind of seek out lighthouses. I've always been drawn to them too. And it's very interesting you say that, because I wonder if it's just something. It's a little bit of mystery, I think, with lighthouses. The way
a little bit of like a weird romance to it, because of the hard life and what they went through and all that kind of stuff.
So K2 meters, I like K2 meters. They're very basic equipment. There's nothing incredibly right. There's nothing incredibly difficult to them. Anyone can use them. I like simple. I think you can do just as much with simple as you can complicated and highly expensive. You can get a K2 meter for $26.
The fewer the buttons and lights and such, the better off she is.
Actually, that's not true. I'm actually pretty good at these. I like the Mel meter too. Now, the Mel meter is great because the Mel meter not only measures EMF and EMF, but it also measures temperature, ambient room temperature. And so I really like the Mel meter. I think the Mel meter tells a lot. Quick story about the Mel meter. We were in investigation, and this also brings into account what you said about EMF not spiking when it's just a real true EMF hit that is normally in a location. We were in the bar area of an establishment, and I had a dream a few days before about a woman at this establishment. Now, I'd never been there, didn't know anything about it. I purposely didn't want to know a lot of information about this place. And I was telling everybody about the dream I had. It was a very fuzzy, nondescript dream, but I definitely knew there was a woman there, and she was in a blue dress. We're sitting at the bar, and we all have our equipment, and we're talking, and we're getting a little bit of activity. And all of a sudden, when I said, "Is your name?" I said a specific name. I won't say the name right now because some of this is still kind of private, but the equipment just went crazy. It just went crazy. The EMF went off, the little ghost hunter equipment stuff went off, everything just went crazy. And after that, the person that I named was interacting with us. And it's funny because you could feel it. I felt her. Like I said, I can tell a female versus a male energy. It was definitely a female energy. She was right up at me. I could feel her right next to me. And somehow I knew her name, and the equipment went crazy. Now, the funny thing about that is that it was a bar. So there was I can't remember the word, but every once in a while it kicks on something for the cooler or something. And when it kicked on, we thought originally that it was the EMF spikes were because of that. But then I sat there and I said, you guys, if it was because of the equipment turning on and off, it would be a steady spike. I mean, we were getting, when we were talking to this energy, the spirit, we were getting spikes of 68 EMF, which is
it's a lot.
Absolutely insane. And when I'm investigating, I get a lot of spikes like that. But it would be 68, 32, 18, 4, 63, 52, 41. And it was all over the place. And so I said, you guys, if this is this equipment turning on and off, it's going to go to 78 and stay at 78. It's not going to go up and down and up and down. That's not how equipment works. And so that's a great example as well of being able to rule things out that you think it might be. And I truly believe, it's also a great example of having feelings too, and taking feelings into account in coordination with the technical scientific equipment that we were using at the time. And the Mel meter was great because it showed a few degree drop in temperature, and it was spiking like crazy. So just a good example of all kinds of things. I'm a big believer in, obviously, in personal experiences and feelings, and that was a good one there too.
Well, and I know a lot of people have a hard time believing or trusting personal experiences because somebody could lie. Absolutely. And we, even on some of the big TV shows, we know that some of that stuff is not real. We know that some of that is acted out. I'm not going to mention any names of TV shows, but at any rate, with that knowledge, I mean, I think people, are a little skeptical of it. But when you're actually in the moment investigating, it's a part of the whole investigation. It's one tool that you can use to prove what's going on.
Right.
So I think it's very important.
It is.
What I know we've got some evidence. We're going to get to some.
Yes.
I almost think we should break this up into two parts because
So do
we've got
I.
a lot of evidence to go to. So we could do another podcast on this. But I also think it would be cool for people to contact us via our Facebook page and tell their story. Maybe they've got a story of investigate or the first time they had something happen to them or whatever it is. I'd like to hear some personal stories.
Maybe some listener tales. We could do some some installments of listener tales and have people tell us their stories and we can read them on the air and we can talk about them.
And we can read them like this. So they're very scary.
The man of 1,000 voices. No, I think that's a great idea. I think, look at that, genius at work. And we should probably.
As David Letterman once said, there's no off to the genius switch. You know what I'm saying? There's never a way to shut off the genius.
That's right. And so, we could go on and we probably should do our own, personal experiences as well. I've had plenty of them. You've had some. Why
not? Absolutely. We can talk about one every damn
I know.
Go around.
I know. And it's just, you're right. It's the whole picture of everything. It's believing in yourself and believing that, maybe I'm not crazy. Maybe this is really happening and opening whatever.
Listen, let me tell you something. You're crazy.
I am not crazy. I'm not crazy.
I'm going to have a sip of my coffee.
He messages me the other day and he says, I'm laughing at us. He was listening to one of our episodes after it was done. And
you're nuts. You're absolutely crazy.
It has nothing to do with it. You said that we laugh about the stupidest shit. And we do.
Well, we do.
We do.
All right, so we've got some evidence here. Unfortunately, a lot of my investigation, the evidence that I have, I'm unable to really share with you because it's part of a TV show and I don't have the rights to it. The producer does and the director does and all that kind of stuff. However, I will just say up front that if you want to see some cool evidence and you want to be open-minded about it, never trying to sway people to believe or not believe, it's up to them. But if you want to see some cool evidence and a cool storyline, you can check out Haunted State on Amazon Prime. It is streaming now. There are 2 movies, but to be honest with you, I think the best work done there is the series of shows that were kind of linked together. I think there's 8 of them or something like that. So
that's how we met.
Some evidence, and if you want to see some evidence that I can't share with you on the podcast, some visual and audio and other stuff, you can check that out.
And
now,
I highly recommend watching it all the way through from beginning to end. And that final episode is phenomenal.
Well, here's the thing. I'm part of it. I did not see the final episode until it came out. So we weren't allowed as members of the group to see that until it happened.
Right.
And when I saw it again, nearly shit my pants. So that's, So.
It's something, and I don't want to give anything away, but really, I highly recommend the series. It's what made me reach out to Todd to begin with to tell him I really enjoyed the series.
Great. That's the reason. All right. Now, I'm loaded up with the audio here.
All right.
Let's start off with your stuff.
Okay.
Choose the group that you want to use today, and then we'll save some stuff for the next podcast.
Okay, well, let's talk about some of the stuff that let's do some of the stuff we've already talked about. So let's do a few EVPs today, and then we can talk about some of the other stuff next week.
Okay.
Okay? All right,
Yep.
So the first one is, I mentioned earlier that I've been to Gettysburg. I love Gettysburg. I feel drawn to Gettysburg, always have been. Was told that I had a previous life in Gettysburg.
I think that's probably true.
Which doesn't surprise me. Does not surprise me at all. Seriously, because I am so drawn there. When we go, poor Dave, let's just preface this story by poor Dave. When we go there, we have to drive the battlefield each morning and each evening, twice a day. The same battlefield that we've driven a million times, we have to drive it every single day, twice a day, so that I can go through there.
So you can look for his spooks?
Yeah. So, and I've seen some. Personal experience, just a quick personal experience. We were driving down one of the roads in the battlefield, and Devil's Den and Little Round Top were on the left side of us. And coming towards us were 3 young teenagers in Civil War uniforms. One was holding a flag, one had a drum. The other one didn't have anything in his hand. And they were sort of walking half on the road, half off the road. And I said, Dave, that just looks kind of weird to me, like these boys. And
so did Dave see him too?
Yes, he did.
Okay.
And so we slowed down because they were sort of in the road and sort of not. And we slowed down and drove by them really quickly, or really slowly. And they didn't look at me. Now, if you're walking down the road, you're going to look at the car that's passing you. You're going to make some movement. These boys did not. And they looked about 14. And they just looked straight ahead and kept walking. What's interesting about that, I at one point I did say to Dave, I don't think those were real people. Because what's very interesting about this is me being at the battlefield as much as I am, I know how it works. I know that you have to literally sign up at the visitor center to reenact. You can't just go to the battlefield and reenact. So there was no reenacting going on that day. There was nothing going on the battlefield. It was quiet except for some visitors here and there.
Got to have Dave on the show too.
Yeah, he's going to come on.
Once we talk to your mom, I'm going to get some scoop on you from your mom, and then I'm going to get it from your husband.
My mom's coming up very shortly, by the way. But
right.
He is he's a great example of someone who was completely skeptical, who now is just, he really doesn't know what to make of all of this.
Or does he just say that he believes you, so you shut up?
No. That's possible, too. That's highly possible. So that's a great personal experience because I truly feel that we saw something that wasn't happening in real time. Just phenomenal. And people have reported over the years seeing entire battalions of soldiers marching in the fields at Gettysburg. So it's highly possible. We were in the National Cemetery in Gettysburg visiting Abraham Lincoln, the memorial.
Wait a minute. You were visiting Abraham Lincoln?
We were visiting the memorial.
7 years ago.
And he's such a jerk. So,
nice to meet you, Sandy. I'm Abraham Lincoln.
Oh,
the
Lord.
15th president of the United States. Or was it 17th? I don't know my history.
I was just
shot in a theater. Did you know that? Yes, I'm dead. My wife was Mary Todd. She was a striking woman. She liked my beard.
She also was a believer in the paranormal, by the way, the afterlife.
That's right. She was.
She really was. A very interesting, not just an aside, but you can like the Ford's Theater Facebook page, and they do presentations every once in a while. So that's where Lincoln was assassinated. So just an aside there. I do that. I'm into the virtual lectures. So anyways, we were in the cemetery and we heard cannon shots. Here's another interesting fact. There are no cannons that are allowed to be shot on the battlefield. The cannons that are on the battlefield are non-working. You cannot reenact and use a cannonball or a cannon. You cannot do that. It's not allowed. So where cannon shots came from, cannonballs, I have no clue. But that was yet another thing. So we stayed in 2008. We stayed at the Cashtown Inn, another location that was featured on Ghost Hunters many years ago, because that's where I stayed a lot. I based most of the places that I stay when I travel on old Ghost Hunters episodes. And the Cashtown was very interesting because it was a Confederate. It was taken over. It was from 1797, I think it was, just outside of Gettysburg. Taken over by the Confederates. General Lee was there. Many famous generals were there. Taken over. And the owners were a couple of Irish immigrants. Mary and I want to say Joseph Mickley. And they were Irish. They had the brogue. They had the whole 9 yards. When the Confederates invaded the Cashtown, they ran to the attic and they hid in the attic. So today the Cashtown is a bed and breakfast and a restaurant. It's absolutely gorgeous. Highly recommend that you stay there. The weekend that we stayed there, there was only one other group of people staying at the cash town. They were ghost hunters. They actually got kicked out the first night because they weren't behaving the way they should. And they thought it was a big joke. So they were actually kicked out the first night. The second night we were there, we were completely alone in the cash town. Just an aside, Sam, who's the guy that was in the movie Gettysburg?
Ooh.
Sam
Yeah,
Elliott.
I know who you're
Sam
talking about.
Elliott. Sam
Sam
Elliott.
Elliott, yep.
He actually stayed in the suite that we stayed in. It was called the General Lee Suite. It was the attic. And I'll save you a lot of the stuff. We can talk about it on the next episode, but a lot of personal experiences in there. A lot of personal experiences. But the first night we were there, I set up my digital recorder on the dresser. And I think I may have some pictures somewhere. I'll put those up on Facebook and on our YouTube video version of the podcast so you can see them. Set it up. We went and got ready for bed. So at one point in these two EVPs, you can hear me talking, but just disregard that. It wasn't until...
Which is what your husband does all the time anyway.
He ignores me. I know. So then...
He disregards you. Is that you, Sandy?
I can't wait to get him on here. So it was months later that I actually got a chance to review this digital recording because when we got home, our dog was very ill and I just put it down and didn't think about it. One night I was listening to it by myself and about a minute and a half into the audio, I got something very interesting. So Todd, just play the one that says Cash Town, just plain Cash Town.
Okay, now wait a minute.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, the human-sounding voice, was
that was
you
me
talking?
That was me. Yes, that was
So
me talking
I heard
to
something.
Dave.
I heard something before that.
Yes.
And I heard something after that.
It's in three parts. It's in three parts.
I'm
The first one, and then it's a few seconds, then the second one, then me, and then the third.
Gotcha. Here it comes again. Oh, okay, that creeps me out.
All right, so here's what it might be a little bit hard to hear, but it's basically a Class A EVP. It was, hey, and then help me, and then you can hear me, and then looking for me. What's
Okay,
interesting...
we're going to listen to it again.
Listen to it again.
Let's do it one more time, okay?
That's hey.
Gotcha. Ooh. Okay,
Now-
I'm going to tell you something right now.
Mm-hmm.
That is fucking creepy. Now, like audio to me, because we work in radio, I love the K2. I love stuff like that. Video, you know, if you get some video evidence, it's always cool. Audio evidence to me is really interesting because we work in that medium. And
Right.
so when you hear something like that, holy shit.
I was by myself. Dave was DJing a wedding that night, and I was by myself when I heard that, and I was afraid. Now, it's a little bit cleaned up from what it was, but what's very interesting about this is it sounds almost as if the male was leaning over the dresser, talking right into my audio recorder.
It was right into the audio recorder. It was
And-
right there.
And the Mickleys, who were Irish immigrants, hid in the attic, looking for me, help me, looking for
Interesting.
me. And
Interesting.
if you listen to the last part really carefully, it sounds like he has an Irish brogue.
All right, let's listen to it one more time. So as soon as I start, this is where he says, hey, here it comes. I can almost hear like a little bit of a rolled R.
Mm-hmm. Yep,
Looking
a
for
brogue.
me.
Yes,
Right,
looking
yeah.
for me. Yes.
Yep.
And so I actually showed that to David Considine, who is a very well-known in the paranormal world demonologist and investigator. And he was pretty amazed by it. He didn't really know what to make of it, given the fact that, and this is where knowing your history comes in really handy, given the fact that Jacob and Mary, it was Jacob, I'm sorry, not Joseph, Jacob and Mary Mickley were Irish immigrants, and that is an Irish brogue at the end. And given the fact that
Very
they
well
hid,
could be, yeah.
yes, and they hid in the attic, so that was pretty amazing. And then I thought that was it, because I had about 8 hours worth of 8 hours worth of audio that I had to go through. I thought that was it, but no, it wasn't. I actually had about 3 or 4 minutes of more information coming through to me. And this one is just a little one. It almost, I'll let you play it and then I'll tell you what I think it is.
All right, here it comes. All right, let me do it one more time. Okay, I don't know what it's saying, but again, I can definitely hear it.
To me, it sounds like shut your mouth.
Are you sure it wasn't Dave? Come on.
No. But again,
like
I
you're
don't
talking in the background and he's under his breath going, shut your mouth.
But again,
woman.
But again, I don't like to read too much into them because I wasn't there when it happened. But
were
it
you
seems
irritating them possibly?
No, I think
Are
they
you
were.
Sure?
I think I'm to this day. Now we're talking 13 years ago. To this day, I'm kind of going back and forth between intelligent energy and residual energy. Because I'm wondering,
of course, it could always be both.
It could be both. It could
right.
be. Because I feel like that statement is like a mirroring of either a Confederate soldier may have said that to them as they took over the inn, or maybe he said it to his wife, or he said it to somebody, shut your mouth. Shh. I'm not sure. There was even more. I don't have that one, but there was even more, and it would just ramble on in what seemed to be a language that I couldn't understand. I showed that one to David Considine as well. He said to him it sounds like it could be Gaelic.
Okay.
Which would make sense because being Irish, it may have been in some sort of language that I would not understand. It's an ancient language. Possible.
Those are very good.
Yeah.
Those are both very good.
That was really my first ever, my first ever delve into being serious about paranormal investigating, and that's what I got. And next week's episode, we'll talk a little bit more about everything, and I'll tell you all the other stuff that happened, because a lot of stuff happened in that place. It was crazy.
We've got at least one other set of audio here, Rutger, and then we've got the number one, she's coming, and then we've got my audio evidence.
And let's do that next week, because those deserve their own little stories in and of themselves. So that's just a little taste of the kind of stuff that I've gotten over the years. We can continue this conversation next week in part 2 of discussing evidence.
I have to tell you, and again, I'm a skeptic. I know you quite well, but when I hear something, the first thing I'm going to say is that what it seems to be? Mm-hmm. And so I always question it, whether it's you, whether it's me, whether it's somebody else.
Right.
I will always question, what is that? I hear both of them. Obviously, the first one that we played is creepy as fuck.
Yeah.
That is creepy shit. Mm-hmm. So.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm like you. I'm a skeptic. I'm essentially a skeptic. And which is ironic, because you think that the two of us who we live our lives as people who are open, you'd think that we would just, but I think that makes us even more skeptical.
Yeah.
I do ironically believe that makes us a little bit more skeptical than maybe somebody else might be, because we want to make sure that what we're hearing and seeing, and believe me, I went over that many, many times over the years.
Holy crap. I'm really impressed with it. That is a great EVP.
And that was the first EVP I ever got. And I got it within a minute and a half of my first audio session ever.
The first audio I ever got was really before I started investigating with the group. I told you about my friend Lisa, who lived upstairs from me. She and I went to a graveyard. And when people do this type of stuff, one of the first places you go, let's go to a graveyard, because you want to get scared and stuff. And I did get some audio, and it did sound like a German type language, but at that point really couldn't figure out exactly what it was.
Wow.
So
it's interesting. There's a lot of things that I hear that I am extremely skeptical of. I don't understand how people are a lot of times they're just so adamant about what they hear. And I think to myself, I don't hear that at all. I don't listen to audio on TV shows because unless it's completely Class A, very clear, I cannot hear the same thing they hear. And I know that TV kind of screws with things a little bit too, messes with stuff, but I don't know. I'm very tough on audio like this, but that one to me is pretty telling.
It's easily heard.
Yeah. So, Todd, my mom will be on with us hopefully next week to be continued.
She's a little under the weather.
Under the weather, so we're going to have her come on next week. We're also going to do part 2 of this episode next week. We've got even more evidence to share, more stories to share, personal experiences. It's going to be a lot of fun. I love talking about experiences and evidence because it's sort of what keeps us all wanting to do what we do. You know, trying to figure it out, which we probably will never figure out, but just trying to, prove to ourselves and to everyone else that, yeah, we're not crazy. There really is something going on. There's so many things in this world, this universe that we don't understand.
I also want to do an episode as we keep coming up with ideas during this one. A friend of mine had a dog pass away. And at the point that the dog passed, something interesting happened on the video cameras in his house. And so I want to talk about just, I guess, theories or philosophies about whether or not animal energy could also come through, and if they only come through as themselves or if they can come through as other things.
That's a great idea. Again, we talked about my dog Jack, who the two different psychics in the room saw the same thing. Without having, I don't know, they didn't know who I was. I didn't know who they were. They saw the same thing. And I have a friend who is an animal communicator, and I'd love to get her on here, Todd, because she...
Absolutely.
Amazing. I did a podcast a couple of years ago, and she was a guest on it, and she just blew me away. And she's helped my mom with the passing of her dog. So let's do animal communication and animal spiritual energy on a future episode. I think that'd be great.
Keeping track of all these? Because I'm not.
I am. We also have to get Dave on here to talk about his skepticism.
Listen, I want to talk to him about more than just skepticism. I want to talk about how he puts up with you on a constant daily basis.
He's a saint. He's a
As
saint.
she sat in the drawing room, she called for her husband Dave to bring her purse. Oh, Dave,
listen,
she
when
said,
I'm in the recliner,
would you bring me my handbag?
When I'm in the recliner and I have a dog on me and a cat on me and I drop the remote,
that poor man.
I ask him nicely if he'll grab the remote for me.
Poor
there.
Dave.
So anyways, all right.
Send your donations to Dave, care of the podcast. Everything that will go toward that poor man and the recovery that he needs to get out of that relationship.
So I hate you. I love you and I hate you at the same time. So a big thank you to all of our listeners, to everybody. This is episode 4 already. This went fast. And we thank you so much for joining us and coming along on our wacky ride. You can find us on all of the outlets that you find podcasts on. YouTube, Facebook. Make sure you like our Facebook page, the Sandy and Todd Cast, and just thank you guys, everybody. We'll see.
Oh, David, could you bring me a brandy and a snifter, please?
We'll see you next week. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
How many more miles left in this race? How long it takes, I don't know. In the end, it ain't about the pace. It always ends at the crossroads.